Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our October California Brokers Business Accelerator on lease options, hosted by our San Diego and LA broker, Tom Bullock, but also featuring our other California brokers, Michelle Beeson and Jeff Green. As you know, every month we have a special promotion where you can receive fun gifts and promotions from Allison James just for referring an agent to us. For the month of October, you have a chance to earn sign rider packages. For each agent you refer to us, we will send you a sign rider package and you can earn up to 5 packages. All you have to do is have spoken to the agent about joining Allison James, and they must be expecting a call from us. To refer an agent to us at any time, please go to Allison James University and click on the Referrals tab. From there, you will find a form that you can fill out with the agent's information. I also want to quickly remind you of a wonderful product from Shark TC, which is our in-house transaction coordinator company. And my slide is not showing, so I'm just going to talk about it. Shark TC will not only be your transaction coordinator throughout your entire transaction from start to finish, but when your transaction closes, your clients will receive a closing gift box directly from you, but you don't have to lift a finger. Shark TC does all the work for you. Each transaction with Shark TC is only $400, but you can get your first transaction done for $250. Keep an eye on your emails for our upcoming Client One program, which is a follow-up program with your clients that will have a follow-up with your clients for up to 1 year. This will be launching very, very soon. Today's webinar is sponsored by Movement Mortgage. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our California Brokers Business Accelerator. Remember, if you have any questions during this presentation, you can type them in the chat box on your Zoom control panel, and we will do a Q&A at the end of this presentation. I will now pass it over to Tom to start off today's webinar. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. Thank you, Tori. Before I get started here today, I just want to give a shout out to Shark TC. As a broker reviewing files, and I know Michelle has made comments as well as Jeff, how good they are with respect to getting the documents in on time, executed properly, and closed on time, which is most important to all of us. So anyway, they're doing a great job, and if you haven't started using them, I'd recommend that you give them a try. Lease option, good or bad? Well, the point and purpose of this presentation isn't to make you experts on the lease option, because as you'll see as I move along here, there's more to it than just putting together this sale or a lease on a given property that might be available. There's a lot of legal ramifications that come into play on this. And so the purpose of what I'm doing today is just kind of bringing those to your attention so that when and if you are ever presented with by a client, buyer or seller, that they might be interested in pursuing that as a possibility, that you'll be able to at least have the ability to kind of give them an outline as to what they might expect, and more importantly, give you a roadmap as to where you might want to take it to get more information, to get more detailed information regarding the lease option and how it affects both the buyer and the seller. Generally speaking, I am not a fan of the lease option. And the reason for that is, there are a number of reasons for that, which I'll be covering. But typically, not always, but typically what I have seen in the past is the seller, on the seller side, they're generally asking too much for their property, and what they're asking is above current market value. So they either have had no activity or very limited activity when it comes to offers, and are open to the lease option with the possibility that they'll get their sale price. On the buying side, typically speaking, again, not always, but typically speaking, I have seen buyers that have either a money issue with respect to the down payment, and they're hoping that they can lock down a property today, with the possibility of saving enough money over the option time period so that they can have the money and the house when the option period becomes due. Also, I've seen buyers with credit issues, and they're hoping that during the option period, they're able to clear up their credit so they can move forward with the purchase. So those are kind of the I'm going to say the dominating factor of the two sides that I have seen that have moved forward with a lease option program. Now, to be fair, I have seen lease option sales move forward. Everybody agreed on the purchase side, on the lease side, as well as the option side, and have moved forward and closed escrow, and everybody's happy and lives happily ever after. But as you'll see, there are a lot of potholes in the lease option process, and that can take your transaction and make it go sideways. What are some of the issues that can arise? None of us like it when our buyers, whether we're on the buying side or selling side of an equation, when the buyers move in or want to move in prior to the close of escrow. There are too many problems that can develop as a result of that, and the same is true here with the lease option. The lease option, a buyer can move in, and during the lease portion of the lease option, they can determine they don't like their neighbor, they don't like their neighborhood, they don't like the schools their kids are going to. They have found that the house isn't quite laid out to their family liking, and not quite what they thought at the beginning. They don't like the lot, it's too big, it's too small. Location to their lifestyle, they're finding it's not quite as convenient as they hope. Noise, whether it's street noise, airplane noise, or any other type of noise factor that may come into play, is something they didn't anticipate, and as a result aren't quite happy with the move that they've made. On the selling side of the equation, the seller may find that he can get an offer, that another good offer comes in with a non-contingent buyer after he's in the agreement. The problem with that is the buyer can go into a backup position because the seller has a legally binding contract. The problem with the lease option is the lease option is going to be 6 months to a year. That backup offer is not going to be around much when it comes to that kind of time frame. Values go up and down. Now, with a lease option, it's a requirement on the lease option that you come to an agreed upon purchase price up front. Now, the document you're going to use in a lease option is going to be the residential purchase agreement, the residential listing agreement, the option agreement, as well as the commission agreement. And with the residential purchase agreement, you're going to need to determine purchase price, because to have a legal contract, you must have the purchase price. You must have legal consideration, which is the deposit. You must have the buyer place a deposit on the escrow. You must have an agreement when it comes to the contingencies, the inspections. Now, I'll be covering the option agreement soon, but keep in mind, with the option agreement, the requirement is placed on the buyer to do their inspections prior to signing or executing the option agreement to make sure the home is what they anticipate it to be. So again, when it comes to the residential purchase agreement, those are all considerations that have to be taken into account when completing the residential purchase agreement. You must establish a time frame for the option. In other words, is it going to be a 6-month option? Is it going to be a 12-month option? Or somewhere in between? I would never, ever recommend more than 12 months. In fact, I don't even like 12 months. 6 months to 9 months, I think, would be a little bit more controllable. You start getting upwards of 12 months or more, who knows what's going to happen to the market? Who knows what's going to happen to the individual families? So you need to make sure that when you put this together, you don't have a buyer coming in and say, hey, I need 2 years, or you need a seller saying, hey, I want to just go on for 18 months or a minimum of a year. Try to explain some of the downside to this. Number one, it's hard to predict the real estate market. So in today's world, to say property values that we would establish today are going to be valid in 12 months from now is ludicrous. We're not, it's not going to be the same. Prices go up, prices go down. So keep in mind, on the selling side, you might agree to a price today. 12 months from today, you might find that the price you agreed to is low. That means your seller's not going to be happy and they're going to want to go back to the negotiating table once the option by the buyer is exercised. Same is true on the opposite side. If the values go down and the buyers agree to a higher selling price, they may not get an appraisal. And if they don't get an appraisal, guess what? Yeah, they're going to be back at the negotiating table trying to negotiate the price down to the appraised value. So as you can see, the longer that time goes out, one side or the other potentially could be unhappy with what has taken place with property values and how it affects their pocketbook. You need to work out details for the lease. Fair rental market. So let's say fair rental market today for a home of the nature they're talking about is $2,000 a month. So are you just going to charge $2,000 a month and that's it? Or are you going to say $3,000 a month, of which $1,000 a month will be applied towards the purchase of the property? There are some dangers to that, but that I have seen that take place, and that is the buyer in creating more of a down payment for their purchase. Deposits. You're going to need deposits on the sale part of the transaction, which I've mentioned. We're going to need deposits on the lease part of the transaction because there's separate transactions. So the buyer's going to need to come up with additional deposits there. And when I get to the option agreement, there's a third deposit that's going to be required by the buyer. Benchmarks, contingencies when it comes to lease option. Inspections, how is that going to be handled? Release of the contingency, the final any and all contingencies. Now you can address that, as I mentioned, on the lease option document. The buyer is stating that they're going to do the contingencies prior to executing the document. So really the only contingency moving forward would be on the loan and the appraisal at the point when and if the buyer decides to exercise the option to purchase. You must figure and determine the term of the lease as well as the term of the escrow. So the lease would start on the agreed upon date and terminate upon the close of escrow. So if, for example, you have a 2-year lease and a 12-month option, if the buyer elects not to exercise their option to purchase, then they still have a valid lease for the added 12 months. So that has to be taken into consideration. If the option period is 6 months, for example, and the lease is for 1 year, again, if the buyer elects not to take the option, the buy option, then they have a valid lease for 12 months or an additional 6 months. And if the seller decides they wish to sell the property, again, they're going to need to sell it contingent on the terms and conditions of the lease. If the buyer elects not to exercise their buy option upon the agreed upon date, the buyer at the same time of exercising that option, per the option agreement, agrees to forfeit the option money that has been given to the seller for the option. So the option agreement, there is an agreed upon deposit that the buyer gives the seller for the option, and for that option there is a deposit and a cost to the buyer. So that if the buyer, even if the buyer decides not to move forward with the purchase of the property and exercise that option, they forfeit that deposit. That's in the agreement. The rental deposit. The rental deposit would be handled in accordance with DRE regulations. So whatever damage this occurs to the property while the tenant is in there, what other factors that may come into play with regards to the property that the seller or owner can legally deduct, they have that option. All rent monies are forfeited by the buyer. So in my earlier example, where they may have a $3,000 a month rent payment, of which $1,000 goes back to the purchase of the property. If the purchase is not exercised, all rent money, including that added $1,000 a month, stays with the seller or owner of the property. So as you can see, there is a big financial risk to the buyer tenant in a lease option program. What happens if the seller defaults or the property owner defaults? Again, that's a legal matter, and we would have to refer our client, buyer or seller, to their attorneys to get advice on how to move forward if that situation were to occur. In fact, prior to the signing of all the agreements, we should always, always, always have our clients refer to legal authority, an attorney, for legal advice before signing the agreement. We want the attorney to provide legal advice as to whether this is a good idea or not a good idea for them personally in their financial situation. We're not qualified, we're not accountants, we're not attorneys, we're not qualified to give that advice. The only advice we're qualified to give is to seek legal counsel. And that's to both parties before they execute it, because this is a big financial risk that both parties are taking in response to a lease option type of transaction. Agent commissions, that's a big topic on this. How does an agent get paid? When do they get paid? And like everything else in real estate, it's negotiable. You need to make sure you can get paid up front upon execution of all the documentation and start of escrow. You can get paid partially up front and partially when the lease option is executed or at the close of escrow of the lease option. But it's negotiable. And who pays it? Typically the seller will pay it. But again, if they negotiate the buyers to pay a portion of it, that would be a part of the negotiations between the buyer and seller. And then obviously we would be involved from the point of view that if the buyer's going to pay a portion of it, we're going to need to get a commission agreement with the buyer to cover their part of the, not put it on the contract, but make it a part of the commission disbursement. Fiduciary responsibility. Start to finish on a lease option, we as agents have a fiduciary responsibility to our client. Now, that's not to be confused with doing property management. We do not do property management. So once the lease is executed and the tenants move in, then it's up to the owner to provide property management. We do not provide that service. We do not allow our agents to provide that service. But again, as the transaction progresses to our client, we have a fiduciary responsibility to keep communication with them, keep them updated, and to make sure that all the requirements of the lease option are being adhered to by our clients, so our client doesn't find themselves in a position of being in default. Communication, start to finish. Communication is a key to lease option type transactions. In the very beginning, when the idea comes up and you're starting to formulate what will work for your client, you need to talk to your broker. You need to get an idea you need to get information from your client, buyer or seller, as to what is their true motivation in even considering this type of program, and then relay that information on to your broker so that we can provide to you maybe a roadmap, so to speak, as to how you may want to proceed from the idea to communication between the buyer and seller, as well as the execution of the contracts. And first, obviously, being informed both verbally as well as in writing that it is our strong recommendation that each of our clients seek legal advice before entering into this type of program. So fiduciary responsibility is ours all the way through. Property management is not a part of what we do. We will not provide that. And talking to your broker with regards to getting a roadmap from the beginning going forward as to the documents that are needed. I've already outlined that, as well as the as well as the requirements that will need to be emphasized, I'm going to say, to our clients, buyer or seller, as to, this is what you're getting into. This is the downside to what we can do. But as far as the legal side, go get an attorney's advice and see what they have to say to you. Oftentimes, and I talk with agents all the time, obviously, we all do, Michelle and Jeff and I. And, a lot of times our clients don't tell us the true story or the full story. I don't want to say the true story, I'm going to say the full story. So we're working with half information most of the time. But when they get with attorneys, they kind of tell everything to your attorney because of that relationship. So, if the attorney comes back with a recommendation or a suggestion, whatever the attorney really states is what we need to go with. Now, if it's not a correct response, and if there's some legal ramifications on it, then, and you need to talk to the broker so kind of sort through what's being said and why it's being said. But again, you need to communicate with everybody, buyer, seller. If another agent's involved, with the other agent, with your broker, us, as well as keeping in constant communication with your clients. If you have the buyer on this side of an equation and they're not happy with the home, again, they're not going to be happy with losing all that money. So you need to make sure up front they understand this is going to happen if this is the course you decide to take. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Tori, do we have any questions?
Sorry. No, it does not look like we have any questions. Jeff, do you have anything to add? If Jeff is here. All right. Tom, do you have any final words?
Yeah, just, again, like with every situation that we as agents and brokers get involved in, when you start seeing something that you're not 100% sure on and you're not quite sure on how it should go, call your broker, communicate, give Michelle a call, give Jeff a call, give me a call, so we can talk about it. And hopefully we can come to a course of action that will benefit our clients, as well as you, our agents, as well as us, the brokers. So again, just communication. Any questions come up, give your broker a call. Thank you, Tori.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I do just want to quickly mention that this will be our last California Brokers Business Accelerator for the year of 2019. Due to holidays, we're going to go ahead and skip November and December, but we will be back in January with a brand new topic and a fresh start for 2020. So with that said, I hope you all have a great rest of your year. I know we'll all talk to you at some point, but thank you everyone for joining us for our final California Brokers Business Accelerator for 2019. And thank you to our amazing brokers for always participating and always providing us with your wonderful insight. A very special thank you to Tom for organizing today's topic and presentation. Thanks again everyone for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Bye everyone.